Hi there, YouTube. So today's video is going to be very different from what I normally do because it's not going to be fashion related. I wanted to talk about art school. If you know me in real life, you probably know that I went to art school. If you only follow me on social media, you probably don't know because I don't really talk about it that much like on social media because why would I? But this is the time of year where a lot of people are applying to schools and deciding what schools to go to, and I thought it would be useful to some people who are considering art school to talk about it as someone who it didn't work out for. A lot of art YouTubers talk about their experience at art school, but obviously they do art for a living now, so art school, worked for them to some extent. It did not work out for me, and I'll go over kind of why that is. Side note, I was partially inspired to make this because I recently watched the anime Blue Period. There's also a manga which goes much further if you want more of that story, but, and that's about, a kid who decides to go to art school. And a lot of the struggles that that character has in starting to pursue art as someone who had never done art before were a lot of the struggles that I had too. Like, I could really relate to that character. And so I thought I would kind of, if you've seen that anime, cool, then you might kind of know what some of the things I'm talking about. But I just want to talk about, my experience with art school, why it didn't work for me, what my issues were with it, and also just why it is also a good thing. But disclaimer real quick though is I went to an arts high school, not like a college, so the experience is probably a little different, and I'll talk about also maybe why, in what ways they're different. Also, sorry if the lighting's not great, it's really cloudy outside today. I'm working with what I can. Okay, so first of all, I want to talk about just why I decided to go to art school. You've probably already noticed, but I'm going to put chapters on this video, so you can skip ahead to the next section if you don't care, or you can just, skip to whatever section you would find useful. But anyway, first I'm going to talk about why I decided to go to art. So I first decided to go to art school when I was in 5th grade, and I was at the Minnesota State Fair, and I saw the booth for the art school. I'm not going to name the art school just because, I don't know. I feel like that's weird when people, know exactly where I went to school and stuff. But anyway, so I saw the booth at the State Fair for the art school, and I was like, you can go to, school for art? As a 5th grader, I didn't know that sort of thing. And I was I thought that was really cool because I've always really liked art. I've always been into art. My mom's an artist, so I kind of grew up around that. So I've always been interested and had an inclination towards that. So, and obviously as a 5th grader, you don't know what you want to do with your life. You don't know what the options are. You're just I like art, so let's do art for a living. And so that's what my little 5th grade brain said. And then that was kind of my goal, up until literally until I auditioned. I, for that whole time, was I'm gonna go to art school, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna be an artist. And what's weird though is for someone who really liked art, I didn't do as much of it as you would expect. Whenever I see YouTubers and people who do art now, it's from the time they were a kid, they were just always doing art. That was their main hobby, was art, all the time. For me, art was not my main hobby. I had many other hobbies, at least in high school, before I auditioned for art school, I was doing dance team, drama, I was on soccer team for a little bit, I did track in middle school. I was also really into music, so honestly a lot of my free time was spent on music and also practicing dance. And so I had a lot of hobbies that were not art. The only time I really ever did art in my free time was for over the summer when I was really bored, or if I wanted to make something. Because that's what I've always done, is I've always liked making physical objects. I've never been one as much to draw and paint. I always like working with 3D mediums. So that's another thing, is I would mostly build stuff or, DIY things. I made a lot of accessories, which is why I have a jewelry Etsy page now. I've always been really into accessory design. So I didn't have a lot of drawings and paintings, and the stuff I did have was usually assignments for school. So it didn't really require or showcase a lot of creativity. But yeah, either way, I thought art school was going to be really cool. And of course the show Victorious on Nickelodeon, if you remember that, came out a few years before I went to art school, so I was oh yes, this is what art school is going to be like. And I mean, parts of it yes, parts of it no. I'll talk about that more later. But I was getting really hyped about it. And honestly, in high school, I think I took one art class before going to art school. I did not use my electives on art. I did creative electives, I did photography, I did metal shop, but I only took one actual art class. And at my art school, at least, photography was part of a separate department that was the media arts, and I ended up going for visual arts, and those were not in the same department, so that photography class really didn't help me. Metalworking, kind of, but that's very, sculptural, and, yeah, mostly, you know, again, assignment-based stuff, so I didn't really get to be creative in that department either. And also, so before I went to art school, like, you know, for a few years I was thinking, oh, I want to do art, like, it'd be cool to just, yeah, go to art school and do art. But then I was still taking all these academic classes, like, I was one of those kids who took AP classes and stuff, so, like, I took every academic class I could, and then, like I said, used my random electives on, like, other stuff. And so, I don't remember if it was my biology teacher or if I came up with this by myself, but some part of me, like, before I even auditioned for art school, I was like, well, maybe I want to go into engineering or, like, something more, like, science-based rather than going straight for art. And that going to art school only confirmed that I should go into engineering and not art. There was part of me beforehand that was like, maybe I don't want to do art. But I had been so set on going to art school up until this point that I was like, well, I'll audition, and if I get in, awesome. If I don't, then I just won't focus on art. That leads me up to the audition, which this art school was 2 years, so it was 11th and 12th grade, so your last 2 years of high school in the US. So I auditioned in 10th grade, like spring of 10th grade, so like around this time, sometime in March, I auditioned. I actually ended up auditioning, well, I wanted to audition for every department because I just was interested in literally everything, but I ended up choosing to audition for visual arts and music. And so I had both those auditions on the same day, and I think first I'll talk about like what the audition assignments were. Of course and like what the audition process was like. It's not the same for every art school, and again, this was a high school, so it probably went a little different than like getting into an arts college, but you know, similar to an arts college. For my visual arts audition, I won't really talk about the music one because this is more about visual arts, but for the visual audition, so you had to have a portfolio, obviously, put together all the work that you had that you wanted to show them. They like to see sketchbooks, so of course I brought what I had for a sketchbook. I've always been very bad at sketchbooks because, again, I have so many other hobbies. I don't really just sit down and draw very much. So my sketchbook back then was kind of pathetic, just like it is now. Like, I've been working on the same sketchbook for like 4 years at this point. So if that gives you an indication of how bad I am at keeping a sketchbook. But, yeah, so I brought my sketchbook, and then they gave us an assignment to prepare for the audition, and then when we got to the audition, there was an on-the-spot assignment. So the assignment we had to do for the audition was to create an art piece based off of 5 words that they gave us. So I actually still have the assignment sheet. Hold on, let me grab that. Okay, I have the assignment sheets here, and fun fact, since I was also auditioning for music, I almost had extra material because for visual arts, they gave you 5 words to base your assignment off of. For music, they gave you 5 images, and obviously looking at them, I can kind of see how they're like related to each other. They probably took the same like ideas and applied it to every department that I was auditioning, so that's really interesting. My visual arts assignment, we had to make an assignment based off of the 5 words: luminous, intangible, startle, mistake, and reveal. And the music assignment, here, I'll just show you the pictures. Yeah, very clearly related, and so I almost had like extra information, but yeah, I actually really liked what I made for the audition assignment for visual arts, and I'll show pictures of it here. Again, it's a sculpture because I've always been more into 3D mediums, so I made a sculptural piece for this. I still have it. Whenever I live somewhere more permanent, I'll put it on the wall somewhere. I just can't drill into these walls, but yeah, I thought that was really cool. One of the few good things I think I made for art school, because I'll get into this later. Everything I made in art school was garbage. I hate all of it. It all sucks except like 1 or 2 pieces. So I think it was pretty good. Like, a little bit literal in some spots, but sometimes with art it's okay to be somewhat literal because then it helps get your point across. So that was what I did for my audition assignment. Of course, I brought my portfolio. I could put up some of the pictures of my portfolio stuff at that point on the screen, but literally it was all garbage because it was all for like high school art assignments or random stuff I did in my free time. And of course, I included photography in my portfolio, again, even though photography was another department, because that's what I had. I didn't have art pieces to show, so I had to show photography to like show that I knew how to be creative. And then for the assignment when we got there, I don't remember a whole lot of this, partially because of nerves and partially because I had gotten up so early and I'm not a morning person. What I remember of the assignment when we got there was we had like candy. I specifically remember things like marshmallows and like licorice and stuff like that, and we had to make something. I don't remember if they gave us, they said you know, make anything, or if they like gave us a prompt, but I feel like I made some sort of bug or like insect. Like, my brain is thinking spider. And I don't know if that's like the assignment was to make a bug, or if they just said make anything and I was like spider. I don't know why I would have thought that, but so I did something like that. I don't exactly remember what it looks like. I had no pictures because they wouldn't let us take pictures, so I don't remember what I made. It was something like that though, something along those lines. That's what my instinct is telling me. And then once I got into the actual audition, they had me lay out my portfolio and any other pieces I brought out on a table. The judges, which I found out later, obviously once I started going there, that they were just teachers from the art department, but they, walked around, they looked at everything for a few minutes, and then they would go through and ask me questions. So they'd point at this one and be like, oh, what was your goal with this one? What technique did you use for this? Like, what was this for? And that was when I realized that, like, have I done any art? Because they'd ask me, like, oh, what was this for? And I'm like, that was a school assignment. Oh, that one was also a school assignment. That one was a Christmas present for my grandma. Like, I realized I hadn't really done much art in my free time, and obviously they're, keeping a poker face the whole time, so I had no way to tell if they thought that was good or not. But I think if you are auditioning for art school, I would encourage you, if you don't already do a lot of art in your free time, to like kind of prepare by doing some art. Even if it's just filling up a sketchbook or something, just so you have more to show and you have stuff that wasn't for an assignment or a specific thing, like stuff that you just did for fun. But yeah, that's how the audition went, and I got in for visual arts and music, and this is a tangent, but like, they said when I was auditioning for both, they were like, you have to be okay with us telling you where you're going. You can't change your mind once we tell you where you're assigned. And I'm like, cool, that's why I'm auditioning for two, is because I literally can't decide. I literally don't care. But they ended up instead being like, hey, you got in for both, and they both departments want you, so you have to pick. You have 5 days to do so. I'm like, what? A 10th grader making this like huge life-changing decision. Like, I still to this day wonder what would have happened if I would have gone for music instead of visual arts, because like, I think at the time I was so much more passionate about music, and to this day I still want to do music. I'm just like, it's too late in my life and I don't have the free time or like the avenues to do so, but like, I still would want to do music, so I'm like, I wonder if that would have worked out better than visual arts. But at the end of the day, I ended up picking visual arts because, like I said, I was considering engineering, and I figured if art school doesn't work out and I do end up going for engineering, visual arts would be a much more applicable, like, background to have, if that makes sense. Like, music and engineering are so separate, but art and engineering kind of have like a little bit of crossover in terms of like creative problem solving and even just like physically constructing objects. Anyway, so I ended up going for visual arts. So now let's talk about kind of what art school was like. Okay, so again, since this was a high school, it wasn't 100% arts all the time. So we had like a block schedule. The mornings were academic classes and the afternoons were art classes. So of course, yeah, I did all my like academic classes, and that's one thing I did not like about art school, was that they did not have a good selection of academic classes. And as someone who was like very academic and into like, math and science and stuff, and like I still wanted to again prepare just in case I didn't go into art, I wanted to take good academic classes, and they didn't really have good options for that. Then in the afternoon we had arts classes, and we operated on quarters, so every instead of like a semester, your normal like semester taking up half the year, was split in half if you've never worked with quarters before. I think we had 2 arts classes because they were kind of more like studio classes, so we had a lot of time in class to work on stuff. I think also since it was a high school, you didn't have a focus. So like, obviously I did visual arts, but I took like watercolor, ceramic, sculpture, like screen printing, still life classes. Like, it was all random stuff, whereas I think in a college you'd be a little bit more focused into classes on what you want to go into. And yeah, the arts classes were fine. I had one teacher that I super didn't like, and I know she was new that year too, so maybe it's just that she didn't have like, the way she wanted to teach down, but like, I absolutely hated the way she taught, and yeah, so that wasn't good. It's because I obviously had to have a lot of classes with her because there only were like 3 teachers, so yeah, that wasn't great because I don't think she liked me either, to be honest. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is during classes we did have crit days, so where everyone would put their work up on the wall, and you'd go stand next to your art and everyone would critique you, and that was always super nerve-wracking. Sometimes it was confidence boosting, because especially for things like still lifes where you want to be like very proportionally accurate, I was always good at that, so people would always be like, oh wow, it looks exactly like the same thing. But again, I was bad at being creative, so anytime it was like a creative work, people would just be like, it's nice, but I think this could have been better, and it just, like, I could tell they were trying to be nice, and it felt so bad. But yeah, that is a thing even at arts high school, is the crit days, and that they're just so nerve-wracking. But you know, take everything with a grain of salt, I guess, is my advice. I mean, if you're on social media, you already know how to take criticism because it's thrown at you from every direction, so yeah, just approach it that way. I think part of the reason art school didn't work out for me personally is probably because I'm not as much as I like to think that I'm creative and I'm like really into a lot of different like artistic hobbies, I'm not really like creative, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not actually creative. Like, if you give me a set of guidelines, I can work within them really well and like, you know, find creative ways to interpret the guidelines. But if you just like are like, do a watercolor, like I'm like, well, of what? Like, what am I painting? Like, do I have to use anything in particular? Like, what do I like? That's just too much freedom for me. Yeah, I don't know what it was. I just in high school I didn't know how to be creative because that's not something they teach you, so you have to naturally be creative. Like, in college I minored in product design, and we literally had a class on creativity, on how to get ideas, how to be creative, how to like extrapolate and get something more interesting to work with than your first idea. And in art school I didn't know how to do that. That's not something I do naturally. I'm very like methodical about stuff, and people always commented on that at art school. They'd be like, oh, you like really think things out, like you really plan things, you're really methodical, like you're really like mathematic about this. And I'm just like, is that weird? Like, is that not what people normally do? But yeah, like in high school I didn't know how to be creative, and I think that's why most of my assignments suck, is because a lot of them are very technically executed badly, and a lot of them are also just not very creative, because I would just, whatever the first idea that came into my head is, I would do that. And I think part of it too was like time management, because again, I didn't learn like time management very well until college, because in high school I never really had to study, so I didn't know how to work on things outside of class. And that's something I had to learn in college when I started getting bad grades. But and so I would always somehow end up procrastinating, and I wouldn't be doing my assignments until like right before they were due, so they would always be rushed. Another thing with art school is they kind of want you to be creative and do things in your own style, but I didn't have a style. So I didn't have an easy time with that, because like it's the same thing for me with fashion now, as I appreciate so many different styles of fashion that I can't pick just one for myself. I like to like dabble in everything because I just like it all so much. It's the same thing with art. Like, I can appreciate hyperrealism and surrealism and abstraction and like, you know, anime. Like, I can appreciate everything like on the same level. So how do I pick what style is mine? I know there are ways to develop your own style, and I like know how to do that now, but at the time I was like kind of almost adapting my style to fit whatever the assignment was, like whatever I pictured would work best with that assignment. And that doesn't really show a clear vision, so I think that's not really what they were looking for. Because that was one thing I did notice at art school, from the other kids, was that they all had like a distinct style. Like, you would see something on the wall and be like, I know who did that. And I thought that was really cool, and I just didn't have that. And so I think from day one, my confidence at art school was like zero, because you know, everyone else seemed to have a really clear vision of their style. Everyone seemed to know what they wanted to do with art. Like, there's a girl who wanted to be a tattoo artist, there's one who wanted to be an animator, there was one that wanted to like, you know, be one of those really pretentious artists that just like only sells commission pieces to rich people, like stuff like that. Like, people seemed to know what they wanted to do with art, and I did not. I was just like, art's cool, I want to do art forever, but I didn't have a concept of what kind of jobs there were or how I would achieve them. And at one point I was thinking about going into architecture, but again, that's not like quite the same as like art. So yeah, I just had zero confidence because I felt like I was so underdeveloped in art compared to everyone else. And again, I think that was partially just because I never did art in my free time, really. So I didn't really have that level of exploration that other people had up until that point. So I think just going in there with a lack of confidence, and then also just like, you know, struggling with being away from all of my friends at public school, which like, I love that group of friends. I still love them. I don't talk to them that much anymore, of course, but you know, my friends from public school were really cool, and I still think they're really cool. And then I had a hard time making friends at art school. Like, I thought I would have more in common with kids at art school, but I really did not. Just at that point in my life, I just did not have the right interest, because a lot of them were into like anime, and I wasn't into anime yet at that point in my life, and a lot of them were into smoking weed or whatever, and I'm still not into that, no thank you, but like, they just had a lot of different interests than me, so I found it hard to make friends with people. And I guess like the other thing too is there was a lot of girls at art school. Like, it was predominantly women, which is a very big contrast to going into engineering, which is predominantly men. But that's just kind of how it's always been for me, is girls don't like me, and I, to this day, don't know why, but I've just always had trouble making friends with girls no matter how hard I try. But that's just kind of how it was, is like, people would talk to me, but no one would like invite me to hang out outside of classes or anything, or no one would like go try to eat lunch with me or anything. So yeah, the few friends that I made at art school that I like still talk to afterwards were dudes, and they were in the music program. Like, I think at that point in my life I was just so much more invested in music, and I had so much more in common with the music kids, and so I ended up, you know, through my academic classes, making more friends with the music kids than the visual arts kids. Don't know why that is, which maybe that's another reason I still wonder if music would have worked out better for me, but yeah, so there's that. It's just like art school, I just wasn't mentally in a great place, because again, I hated that one teacher, I didn't really have any friends, I had zero confidence because I felt like everything I made was crap compared to everyone else. Like, and I mean, honestly, yeah, looking back, it kind of is. Like, every time I look at stuff I made in art school, because I still have a lot of it, I'm like, I just want to throw this away. I just want to burn it. I know my mom probably wants to keep it, so I haven't yet, but I'm just like, I can't stand any of this stuff. I mean, I know, like, you're your own worst critic, and I'm probably always going to hate everything I make to some degree. Like, I've made stuff that I'm okay with, but, like, I'm never going to be super confident about my art. But I think a lot of people aren't. I think sometimes, at some point, you have to like fake it till you make it, or you just gotta be okay with like accepting like, oh, this is my art style, this is just what it looks like. I know it's maybe not technically perfect, but whatever. But you know, again, when you're someone who really likes the idea of things like hyperrealism and stuff, and then you can't do that because you haven't put in the time, obviously, like I know it takes so much time, but like when I try to do it and I can't, I just get so mad at myself. And that's another thing too, is I think to be an artist, you have to kind of be a little more loose and a little more okay with things not going perfectly. Whereas as a perfectionist, it's like, if I do not make exactly what I'm picturing in my head, then I hate it and I don't want to do it anymore. And I think that's also what happened a lot at art school, is I would get a really cool idea for an assignment, but then I just wouldn't have the technical skill, or I wouldn't have the time to make it to that level, and so then I just would rush it at the end to finish it and then hate it, you know? It was just like a vicious cycle of not liking any of my own art, and then that would bring my confidence down even lower and stuff like that. And then again, there was the whole thing of like, oh, you're very like methodical about this, and I'm like, at first I thought it was a compliment, and then I started to think it was like a subtle dig at like the way I approached art, because it like wasn't correct and it wasn't like creative. This is another little side story. Again, since it was a high school, we still had to prepare to get into college. And since we were juniors, we weren't necessarily applying yet, but they wanted us to have the experience of presenting our portfolios. So they brought in a bunch of people from different arts colleges, and it was like a career fair basically, but for colleges. And so you'd go around with your portfolio and like present it and have them, you know, look at pieces and stuff. And they would sometimes give you a little critique here and there, or, you know, of course some places were nicer than others. But the thing that always stuck with me, even to this day, was I was presenting to Parsons, you know, the school that Project Runway is at. I was presenting to them, and the guy was just like looking at my stuff, you know, very dismissively, and he was like rude in general, but anyway, he was just like, your artwork's so stiff. He's like, there's no like life in any of this. And he'd be like, oh, do you see how this is perfectly lined up? That looks like crap. Like, he was like just talking about how like the fact that all my stuff was very like exact and very methodical is like, he was basically just saying this is bad art, like it sucks, it's not creative. And I'm just like, oh, so that's what kids mean when they say that, you know? Like, and that, from that point on, I just like stopped caring and I stopped trying. And I don't know, that whole experience really stuck with me. And it's just because I didn't know how to be creative or how to be loose back then. But I think that's something that's very important to have the ability to do. And again, if you're like seriously considering going to college for art, you probably already, you know how to be creative naturally. You probably like already have like a pretty well-developed sense of what your art is. But in case you don't, that's just something to consider, because yeah, I didn't, and I think it was really detrimental to me, like mentally. So yeah, I did end up going to college for engineering, which didn't go the best either. But art school, yeah, just did not work out for me. I think I just wasn't creative enough. I wasn't cut out for having so much free reign. And again, I didn't even know what I wanted to do with art, which is my first mistake. But like, that's why I think like something like engineering, or like now that I know more, product design would be way better for me, because you're given a problem to solve and you have to solve it creatively, which is what I'm good at. I'm good at creative problem solving. I'm not good at just blanket creativity, like being able to make something from nothing. That's not what my strength is, and I know that now. At the time, I did not know the difference. So, yeah, very important to evaluate kind of why you want to do art, what you want to do with it, and yeah, kind of what your strengths are, because I think if you know what your strengths are, you can definitely focus on those while also kind of improving your weaknesses in the background. But that's the thing, is I didn't know what my strengths were, I just knew what my weaknesses were, and that's kind of what tore me down and kept me from performing at the level that I wanted to. To end this on a better note, I wanted to go over some of the pieces I made at art school that I actually did like, because there are like a few that I'm pretty cool with to this day. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, my audition assignment I thought was really cool. Like, it just looks pretty. I like the colors. Another one, so actually for our first day of school, they gave us art assignments to do, and there was two. So one was an inner self-portrait, so, you know, self-portrait more of like your personality, and second was an outer self-portrait. And I interpreted that apparently a little differently, because pretty much everyone else did like a literal self-portrait, like they drew themselves, and I did not. I went very figurative about it, so like here's my piece. I don't want to go into explaining it because like I absolutely hate like explaining my art to people, so you can interpret this however you want, but I interpret it as your outer self-portrait is how others see you. It's like an outward perception of you, not like what you literally look like. So that's why I did not draw myself. I made this like painting with like, you know, I don't know how well you can see in the picture, but there's like a little ladder coming down made of toothpicks. So yeah, again, like not entirely two-dimensional, because again, I don't like being entirely two-dimensional. But that's what that is. My inner self-portrait, again, sculptural, because I don't like just painting. And that's also what made me feel so weird. It's like everyone else just painted or drew. No one else was really doing sculpture, so I felt like super out of place. And again, maybe that's one thing that like, maybe they liked in my audition. Like maybe they liked that I did more three-dimensional stuff because it seemed kind of rare. But I don't know. I think it didn't work out for me because I was just in so many painting and drawing classes, and I don't like being two-dimensional, so I just like didn't know what to do for those classes, because I'm like, well, if I can't make it three-dimensional, you know, like I don't know. I just got really bored with stuff. But yeah, so this piece I don't like. I mean, it's okay, but I think it looks bad. Like, conceptually, I get what I was going for. Again, I'm not going to explain it because I hate doing that. That is one thing I learned to do in art school, though, is, like, make something and then assign meaning to it afterward. Like, you know, try to, like, invent symbolism on the spot during critiques. Another piece I didn't mind was this watercolor piece. People are always shocked that this is watercolor. Apparently, dry brushing with watercolor is not, like, a common thing to do. But I do have a habit of, like, trying to force mediums to be something that they're not, so I think I was kind of treating this as acrylic, even though it is watercolor. But the assignment was basically just to, like, have a painting of an object that touches, like, 4 corners. I don't know. It was, like, kind of based off of a certain artist. Don't remember the name because it wasn't someone I'd even heard of before. But I think this piece is cute. I like the shape. I think it's really interesting. I had to have a friend cut the mat board for me because cutting a mat board in a weird shape like that just sounds like a terrible time. But yeah, I think it's a nice piece. Like, of course, I can sit here and nitpick it and point out every mistake, but it's definitely a good type of piece to just hang on the wall somewhere. So whenever I live in an actual house where I don't want anime posters up all over, I'll probably put that on the wall. Another one that I think was okay conceptually, but not necessarily in execution, was this one, which is watercolor and then ink, like where you dip the pen in the ink, like the old-fashioned way. Yeah, a pen and ink and then watercolor. And the only reason I think this was executed badly is because I did my classic thing of, at this point I was so done, I just didn't plan it all, I just kind of threw stuff on there. So there's watercolor in wrong spots, you know, I messed up with the pen in some spots, there's random ink splotches that I don't know where they came from. But I think the concept is cute, like the jellyfish because they sting you and, you know, it's electrical, so it's a pun. It's cheesy, but it's kind of fun. So I don't really mind it. I think it could be executed better, but it's a cute little painting, and I think it's the type of thing that if you put it on your wall, people will be like, oh, that's fun, and they won't look at it too hard. So that's what I like about that. I had this installation piece that I think, again, was fine conceptually. I just didn't execute it that well, but I'll put up a picture. But yeah, it's, you know, watercolor paintings of smoggy cities and then, you know, city in the middle with roots. Yeah, it was a commentary on like environmental issues, which makes sense because I ended up going into environmental engineering, so I guess I can see back then where the roots for that were. Literally. No pun intended. The other piece I don't mind in some aspects is this zine that I made, just because I like the illustration on the front a lot. Some of the illustrations inside aren't too bad. But this was definitely one of those pieces where the guy from Parsons was like, yeah, you see how you crunched out all the text stuff? That looks like garbage. And I'm just like, I didn't want to impede the drawings. Yeah, I hold a grudge against that guy, even though I don't know his name. I don't know what he looks like. I'll never see him again, but he sucks. No, just kidding. But yeah, again, like this one I was okay with, but like after that, like I really liked it at first. Like this piece I actually really liked when I first made it, but then after that critique, now I'm like, okay, it's not that great. It's okay, I guess, in some aspects, you know? But out of all the pieces I made, this is one of the better ones. And then of course my like screen printing pieces I don't mind because it's really easy to make screen printing look nice because it's very graphic, so it doesn't need to be super perfect because that's kind of the whole point. So I don't mind these pieces, they're fine. I honestly think I've gotten way better at art since going to art school, and not because of art school. Like, I got better at art because I started doing it more in my free time. I started watching a lot of art YouTubers and following artists on Instagram, and yeah, just generally doing art for fun, which isn't really something I did before art school. And even, like, there was a while after art school where I did not want to do art. Like, I had no motivation to do so. I wanted to avoid it because I just, like, hated everything I made so much. But in college, once I learned more about creativity and more about like different art styles and just kind of experimented more and got more confident in my creativity, I think I was able to make better stuff. Like, I'll throw some of the stuff up on screen that I've made recently, more recently I guess. Again, I still don't do art a lot, so I don't get a lot of practice, but I've made some cute stuff, and again, I'm not doing art for a living or anything, so I don't really care anymore if it's perfect or not. I just care that I had fun making it, and that's really what matters. And I think if you're going to art school, that's something you should keep in mind too, is that like, it's a learning experience and just have fun with it. I think at the time I took it too seriously, and that's why I couldn't have fun with it. So, like people sometimes ask me if I regret going to art school. There's part of me that says yes and part that says no. Like, I think first of all, I kind of got thrown off when I went back to public school because I had missed a couple classes that I had to make up because I didn't have them in art school. You know, things were awkward because, like, I'd been away from everyone for a year, like all my friends, so I felt kind of like stuff had moved without me, and that's always a really weird feeling. That part was kind of weird. It did not do me good for my confidence, so I didn't like that aspect of it. However, I don't fully regret it because I think it was a good learning experience, because I learned that I'm not good at being straight up creative with nothing. I am not good at having free reign over what I make. I need some sort of guidelines or some sort of goal. And I think that helped me narrow down that I didn't want to go to art, because if I hadn't gone to art school, like if I hadn't gotten in, I probably would have, you know, finished high school and then maybe tried to go into art. And I think that would have been a lot more costly mistake, because even though art school was expensive because I had to buy $300 worth of supplies, college is more so because there's tuition involved. So I think if I had gone to an arts college after high school and then realized I didn't want to do art, it would have been a much more costly mistake. So I am glad I realized that sooner for cheaper and realized that I wanted to go into engineering instead, even though, like I said, that didn't work out, and I really should have gone for product design, but I didn't know that until senior year, so that's great. Gotta love education system. Thanks for watching, and if you do have any questions about arts high school or just about my experience, or if you want to share anything that you're thinking about art school, just drop it in the comments. I like to read comments. Okay, so I just remembered, I mentioned Victorious. The one way that art school was like Victorious is that we did get to decorate our lockers. I didn't decorate mine because the art that was already on it when I got it was way better than anything I could have come up with, so I just kept it. I don't have any pictures of it either because it wasn't my art, so, but yeah, that was accurate about Victorious. As far as the singing all the time, I don't know, I wasn't in music. But definitely a lot of creative kids, a lot of kids that had really cool fashion. Very fun, like, environment, I think, aside from the fact that I couldn't make friends very well. Yeah, I remember seeing the locker decorating in Victorious and being like, oh, I hope I get to do that. And of course I didn't, but it was an option, so. Yeah, thanks for listening to me rant and talk about why I'm bad at art. I promise I'm not normally this self-deprecating. It's just like, I honestly think art school was a bad time creatively for me, so it's kind of ironic because If anything, I should have been more creative at art school, but it really had the opposite effect, and I don't know why. But, yeah, again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.